Not that many years ago, if you wanted to go from here to there, you loaded up, turned on the key, took off, and aimed it in the right direction. Your weather was what you saw and what was supposed to be happening when you got there. But there were times when it seemed more like guesswork than science. A whole lot of sky and not many airplanes. So you trusted your instincts, your experience, and know-how. And when you got where you were headed, you looked around, and sometimes, if you saw something that didn't look quite right, you went in a little hot. It wasn't in the book, but they damn sure had a name for it. They called it 10 knots for Mom and the kids. But times and machines change, and the seat of the pants approach doesn't cut it anymore. Watch.
If you see anything, just let me know.
Will do. Nobody's reported anything yet, so maybe we're home free, but okay, passing 1,000, gears down 3 green, landing flaps at 40, and final check is complete.
The winds at altitude are quite a bit at the moment. We've got almost a 50-knot headwind on this approach.
Well, I don't know what to make of this, Tom. I'll keep an eye peeled. Passing through 500. Airspeed's dropping off a little bit, Tom. A little bit more. Wind shear, wind shear.
It's every pilot's worst nightmare. On final, out of airspeed and altitude, and short of the concrete. Fortunately, this is a simulator. But believe this, even in a simulator, a severe wind shear encounter near the ground can ruin your whole day. Now, there are several meteorological conditions that can produce wind shear. But microburst wind shear is generally acknowledged to be the most potentially dangerous. How dangerous is wind shear? Well, over the years, as the accident statistics rose, it became obvious that a severe wind shear encounter could be catastrophic. In fact, wind shear became of such great concern that the aviation community began working on various approaches to help pilots avoid severe wind shear. The first product of this effort was the Low-Level Wind Shear Alert System, LWAS for short. Like any new system, it took some tweaking for LWAS to reach its full potential. For instance, the original system's false alarm rate was high, and the format of the information communicated was lengthy, making it difficult for flight crew members to recognize a potential threat. But now, after nearly a decade of re-engineering, ranging from the extension of some sensor networks to redefining the LWAS wind shear algorithms to the revision of the information display in the tower cab, the LWAS system is proving to be a very effective tool in the identification of potentially hazardous wind shear. However, logistics and cost made the idea of extending the network's area of coverage impractical. So the next step was to devise a system that could identify wind shear events beyond the immediate vicinity of the airport. In other words, a more extensive area of coverage to give an earlier warning capability. Dr. John McCarthy, a scientist with the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, was involved in that effort. Here's how he remembers it.
Not only did we have the scientists and the engineers working hard on Doppler radar and other ground-based systems like LWAS, we had heavy involvement with the users, the pilots, the controllers, continuously through the program as a sanity check to make sure that we were doing the right thing in terms of what came out the end of the pipe in this program. We didn't want to produce a great scientific success that in fact a pilot couldn't use to make a decision to avoid a dangerous or killer microburst, which was what we were really after.
Today, After 10 years of development and testing, a system now exists that will identify and automatically report the location, cell intensity, and direction of cell movement of wind shear events that could be hazardous to air traffic. It's called Terminal Doppler Weather Radar. It works like this. A Doppler radar, equipped with a sophisticated ground clutter suppression filter, is sited well away from the airport, usually 8 to 10 miles. In the monitor mode, it employs a scanning strategy that searches the airspace in a 50-mile radius of the terminal. The TDWR radar data is updated every 1 minute, then processed by a state-of-the-art computer system that incorporates an advanced algorithm to identify storms from the surface up to 20,000 feet. If the system senses a possible wind shear development within 10 nautical miles of the airport, the scanning strategy changes to the alert mode, concentrating its coverage on the expanded wedge covering the approach and departure paths. The system is designed to protect the area when aircraft are most vulnerable to wind shear, say within 1,000 feet AGL, on a 1-mile wide path, 3 miles out on the approach corridor and 2 miles out on the departure corridor. If the system detects a wind shear in this airspace, an alert message is presented to the controller in a common-sense, runway-oriented alphanumeric format that shows the type of alert notification, the approach or departure area that is affected, the expected headwind loss or gain, and the location where the event will first be encountered. In this case, the display indicates that the change will be a headwind loss of 40 knots on runway 18, 2 miles from the runway threshold. This enables controllers to alert pilots of flights that could be at risk and provide the information in a form which pilots can easily understand. A wind shear alert means that the flight crew can expect either a headwind gain of any magnitude over 15 knots or a headwind loss of between 15 and 25 knots. And a microburst alert means a headwind loss of at least 30 knots. If a flight crew encounters a shear of less intensity than expected, it doesn't mean that the alert was wrong, but more likely that their flight path did not take them into the strongest part of the shear. One important point here. Like any new system, TDWR's ultimate success will depend on its credibility, because if pilots have confidence in the accuracy of the system, they will heed its warnings. One day, during the online operational testing, TDWR made believers out of at least 3 flight crews. Listen.
I was a co-pilot on a 737 coming in from Texas to Denver.
I was coming down from Seattle on the DC-8, and we were coming over the northwest gate coming into Denver.
We were scheduled for a flight from Des Moines, Iowa to Denver, Colorado. I think it was probably our last leg of the day.
In the Denver area itself, none of the clouds were big or thick. You could pretty much, they were almost transparent. You could see through most of them.
The Denver area weather was good, except just southwest of the 26 runway, right south of the field, was a small rain shower.
And as we approached Beam, the airport, on our downwind, we looked over and could see one of several rain showers in the area.
The conditions were right, and we had decided to fly 20 knots above ref.
I told the co-pilot, "No, put on another 10 knots of speed," so we was 140, went to 150.
The thing that stuck in my mind was the announcement from Tower that there was an indication of a 50-knot airspeed loss on final.
Give us the wind, and he said something about 80-knot loss. And we both just looked at each other, co-pilot and I, and really in kind of what we were convinced he meant 8-knot loss. So we continued and said, "Would you repeat?" And he did, and he said, "No, it's an 80, expect an 80-knot loss."
And then I think everybody in the cockpit knew that it wasn't quite right at that time, you know. And then when we hit it out and we started our go-around.
Within a second or so, maybe slightly more than a second, I'd say it dropped 10 knots. The captain said, "Let's get out of here."
So we went ahead and executed the go-around. And about about the time we got the flaps to 15 or thereabouts, the airplane started shaking pretty good. And it continued shaking until we were on a northbound heading.
The bottom line is that the system's success in detecting hazardous microbursts, nearly 100%, coupled with an extremely low false alarm rate, should persuade flight crews that the system is credible. This display is another product of TDWR, called the Geographic Situation Display, or GSD for short. It allows the area supervisor in the tower cab and the area manager in the TRACON to see the big picture of the terminal area weather. In addition to wind shear information, the GSD provides gust front information, precipitation intensity, and storm motion. With this edge, the controllers can vector inbound air traffic to what will be the correct runway by the time of their arrival, as well as directing departure aircraft to the appropriate runway in advance of the actual wind shift, reducing ground delays. TDWR is now operational in a number of airports, and by late 1994, it will serve air traffic in 45 domestic airports, chosen because of the airport air traffic volume and the potential for severe wind shear. So remember, the next time you're sitting on the end of the runway waiting for clearance, or headed down the glide slope, if you hear
Microburst alert, runway 35 right, threshold wind 120 at Niner. Possible 40 knot loss on the runway.
do what you've been trained to do. Avoid it. And forget about 10 knots for Mom and the kids.